We'll just start in 1 minute. There's a technical issue that we're trying to fix right now.
I'm able to unmute now.
We are ready to start, Neha, whenever you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break. And now we have with us Neha Trivedi, who's the founder and CEO of Spandan, which is an inclusion and accessibility consultancy service. She curates practical, creative, and sustainable solutions to make inclusion real across organizations with a specific interest in higher education. She has worked several years in the space of inclusion and accessibility for persons with disability with experience in inclusive higher education, training and awareness, research, guidance services, and project management. So without taking more time, I would like to invite Neha Trivedi to take over the welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Rupali. Very good evening to all of you. I hope you are fresh after your tea break. I would encourage whoever can to try and keep your videos on. It would enable me to also know the audience and sort of allow us to also engage, because whilst we do recognize that online has its limitation, online also has its positive possibilities of connecting us all across geographies. So whoever can, please request you to keep your videos on. I also wanted to just check with Dr. Rupali. Can participants unmute themselves to speak during the session?
Yes, they can. Actually, I would encourage if you want to test it, because from my end, they can.
Sure. Professor Nino or anybody else, would you all want to just try and unmute and see if the function's available?
Yeah, it is, because in the last session, I was pretty much asking a lot of questions. So that's not an issue.
Great, lovely. And I hope to hear more questions from all of you, because I hope to see the next 2 hours as a dialogue rather than a monologue, because that won't serve the purpose of inclusion at all. So thank you for having me here today. I'm guessing all of you are from diverse backgrounds, and I am hoping that the audience is also diverse in nature. So at any point in time, anybody would like to share lived experiences, if there are people with disabilities in this group, please stop me at any point in time and share your experiences. That would really add value to the session. So let's begin with what we want to cover in the next 2 odd hours, which is to build our understanding on physical disabilities, right? Is language-wise everybody comfortable with English, or a mix of Hindi, English is preferred? Can I get some feedback on that?
English is
fine with both.
Yeah.
We're fine with English.
Okay, English is
Both
fine, right?
English, Hindi mixing. I think everybody else would also be.
Yeah, I mean, in case there is preference, then I can do either. That's why. Yeah, okay. So English is fine, right?
चाहती हूँ कि हिंदी में भी हो.
हाँ, थोड़ा हिंदी इंग्लिश मिक्स कर लेंगे, ठीक है.
हाँ मैम, क्योंकि बाइलिंगुअल में मजा आता है वैसे. और वैसे लोग भारतीय हैं तो जैसे हिंदी ज्यादा होनी चाहिए मेरे हिसाब से.
हाँ जी, so we will keep it bilingual. हमारी हिंदी थोड़ी बम्बैया हिंदी है, तो हमें क्षमा कीजिएगा, हमारा ग्रामर बम्बैया हिंदी का ग्रामर रहेगा. So please don't expect शुद्ध हिंदी from me, but I will try my best to keep this bilingual. So what we wanted to cover, I'm just going to share a presentation. Yes. So today's session, we want to talk about understanding physical disabilities, right? Now, as all of you might know, and if you all come from higher education institutes, if anybody either in chat or through a show of hands, can you all tell me how many of you all have people with disabilities in your colleges and in your classes? What is the frequency with which you see them around in your environment? Out of your hundreds of students, how often do you see them? Okay. Manisha Roy is saying she has some people. Anybody else who wants to tell me whether they have? आपके colleges में students with disabilities आपको दिखते हैं, है, नहीं है, क्या experience रहा है आपका? 5 in my university is what Zarna is saying. Chetan is again saying very few, maybe 4 or 5 out of 100. Monica is also saying 3 to 4.
I've had students with disabilities in my class, but the number, of course, is very less.
Very less.
I mean, if I have a class of say 40, I'd probably end up having 1 or 2. So that's 0.5%, not even 1%.
Correct. So I think that is echoing the experience of the others also, that there are very, very few people with disabilities in our colleges and in our classrooms. And this is exactly what we want to address, right? That disability is the largest invisible minority in this country. Technically, as per data, 1 out of every 5 people has a disability. Okay, so which means 15% of any country's population, factually and by the WHO data, is a person with disability, which means in India, it would mean that almost 174 million people have some or the other disabilities. And yet, what do our ground experiences show us, right? As you all have said, दिखते ही नहीं है, कहाँ है किसी को पता ही नहीं है. Which is why we say that people with disabilities is one of the largest invisible minorities, not only in India, but the world across, more so in India. And that's why when we talk about physical disabilities or even other types of disabilities, automatically जिनको मिलते नहीं है उनके बारे में understanding limited हो जाती है, right? कि अगर interaction ही नहीं है, दिखते ही नहीं है, हमारे environments में नहीं है, तो हमारी understanding with disabilities, of course, limited to either books or figments of our own imagination. So that's the basis on which we need to sort of accept कि हमारी world, the truth around us is this today, right? As per the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act that some of you might know about, 2016 में India changed its law from the earlier law. So there was a Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 1995, which changed to the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. और ये law के अंतर्गत हमारी list of people with disabilities has been expanded by law from 7 types to 21 types of disabilities. So पहले तो हमें people with disabilities दिखते ही नहीं है. अभी when we talk about 21 types of disabilities, that maze becomes even larger क्योंकि हमें पता ही नहीं है कि कौन से type के disability groups है जो legally accepted है India में और जिनके लिए हमारी institutions में आज की तारीख में access काफी limited है. If I had to ask a question, because I know that you had a session with Krishna a little earlier, in your experiences, what is the reason why there are such few people in our classes? What we have just shared, कि लोग हैं, physically there are people with disabilities in this country, but they are not in our classrooms. What is the reason? Yes, Professor Vinu.
Lack of access to education.
Okay, sorry, who's speaking?
That's Manisha Roy.
Yes, hi. Yes, so lack of access to education. Okay, Professor Meenu wants to share. She has her hand raised.
Since we all come from the education field, of course, definitely lack of education, lack of access to education. But more importantly, I feel that somehow we are the disabled ones because we make them feel disabled. We make them feel lesser. and that is why they are not comfortable in these one-to-one communication means, and one-to-one communication with the person, the so-called, and I say it, the so-called abled person. And
Right.
of course, Manisha has just said lack of infrastructure, and I totally agree.
Correct. Anybody else wants to share any their thoughts? Ki aapke classes mein agar samjho, let me put a counter example. Suddenly, if your class of 100 had 50 students with disabilities, what would your reaction as a teacher be? Tomorrow you went to class, for example, in college, and suddenly now that out of your 100 people, 50 people are students with disabilities. What would your first human reaction to that might become? And there is no right or wrong, right? We are learning together here. So please be open about how you might react and not necessarily give a politically correct answer.
Mixed belief and disbelief, mixed reaction. And also, I think if I speak from my point of view as a teacher, my challenge would be that how I would be able to teach them. That
Correct.
would be my challenge.
Yeah. So just questions on what you will do, right, as a teacher. Okay. Anybody else wants to share? Miss Samriti, Chetan, Aniket, Kiran, anybody would like to share what your thoughts on reasons for people not being there are? And
ma'am, actually, in order for, I believe, access to the institutions would be very important. So
right.
if there are certain barriers that disables people from accessing the classrooms, then they wouldn't be able to enter their classroom. So
Right.
the access barrier becomes a very important challenge.
Right. Okay. Manisha ma'am wants to share something.
Hi. I also feel that, societal support by and large, society at large is not very supportive, including families, because there's lack of education within the families also in a large part of the
Correct.
countryside and even urban settings where, poor families have, many, many children and they have to provide for. And if there's a person with disability, probably
Correct.
that person will be neglected. So
Right.
families, in terms of their setting up their priorities, also would prioritize a person who's physically able, mentally stable, they
Right.
would bet on the best horse that would kind of take them out of poverty. So I think
Right.
society also doesn't really support that much. And families also, you have to educate, sensitize families as well,
Yeah.
to pay special attention to special people with special needs. So I
Correct.
think there also, there is a gap.
Correct. So I think, borrowing from what you all have said, that's exactly what we want to talk about when we talk about access, right? Lack of access in any space oftentimes gets defined by only physical access. जब accessibility और inclusion की बात होती है तो ज़्यादा focus ramps और railings और braille labels और braille stickers पे discussions होता है. पर जब हम access को एक holistic तरीके से देखते हैं, right? So then we are not talking about just physical access, which is one part of accessibility, but the second and the third aspects are attitudinal access and informational access, right? So जैसे आप बता रहे हैं कि society में attitude क्या है, teachers का attitude क्या है, that attitudinal access and the barriers of attitudinal access are sometimes the biggest hindrance, क्योंकि समझो जहां physical access है, जो colleges में ramps बन चुके हैं, for example, and students can make it to classrooms, if the teacher's attitude is not addressed, वो ramp कोई काम का नहीं पड़ता है. या फिर जो हम information access की बात करते हैं कि जो हमारा study material है, हमारा classroom material है, क्या वो methods of pedagogy and studying, is it available to students with physical disabilities in the formats that they would need? वो जो अगर information access handle नहीं हुआ है, तो again, only attitude and physical access will not help. So it's a triad, right? Attitudinal, physical, and informational. और वो जब साथ में चलता है, then people with disabilities will A, be able to make it to your institutes, and two, if they are in your institutes already, actually make a valuable experience out of being there. Otherwise क्या होता है कि students पहुंच जाते हैं, लेकिन उनका education quality people without disabilities के comparison में कोई भी level पे compare हम नहीं कर सकते हैं. So whilst they might be paying the same fees, they are not getting the same experience as a student without disabilities in the same educational institute, right? So that's something to keep in mind when we think and look at the physical disabilities that we are going to do in this session, right? First, what I'm going to do is give you an overview of the different types of disabilities in the RPWD, just to give you the framework. And the session today will focus only on physical disabilities, and the other groups will be taken over by other experts over tomorrow and day after, I'm guessing. Okay. So if you look at the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, there are 5 categories of disabilities that the Act has clubbed. पहला है physical disabilities, जिसके अंतर्गत हम लोग लोकोमोटर, ब्लाइंडनेस, हियरिंग इम्पेयरमेंट एंड स्पीच इम्पेयरमेंट, वो सारे जो फिजिकली लिंक्ड डिसेबिलिटीज है, वो एक बड़ा कैटेगरी है, कैटेगरी नंबर 1, जिसको फिजिकल डिसेबिलिटीज बोला गया है एक्ट में. आई एम स्टिकिंग टू द RPWD फ्रेमवर्क बिकॉज जब हम कॉलेजेस में जाते हैं, जब हम एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट्स के बारे में बात करते हैं, रिजर्वेशंस के बारे में बात करते हैं, देन इन इंडिया वी आर गोइंग टू फॉलो द Rights of Persons with Disabilities framework, and that is the reason I'm following that. The way some of the labeling that has happened in this act is a little problematic, but we are not getting into that discussion for today because of lack of time. So मैं ये जो framework present कर रही हूँ, purely जो RPWD में है वही है. Okay. So the first group is physical disabilities. The second group is what the act defines as intellectual disabilities, which is supposed to be the group where the disability is linked to the functioning or the neural processing of the brain related functions. Now, this grouping has caused a lot of confusion and myths and misconceptions on the ground, because in this group, people with intellectual disabilities, which are IQ related concerns, have been clubbed with specific learning disabilities and autism spectrum. And to top the confusion, हमारे जो NAC के जो frameworks है, उसमें एक category, एक word use किया गया है, programs for slow learners. जो slow learner का जो शब्द है, वो act में, वो जो NAC के framework में people with disabilities के context में नहीं use किया गया है. वो actually it's been used for anybody who's finding learning difficult. पर ground level पे ये बहुत confusion cause create कर रहा है, because everybody is now being called a slow learner, which is not the case. A person with specific learning disability or autism need not be a slow learner, need not have an intellectual deficit, need not have comprehension troubles. And this is something that I'm not getting into detail of today, because that the expert tomorrow will cover. But just to give you the framework, intellectual disabilities is the second main group of people with disabilities, right? The third, which again,
I have a query. I have a small query.
Yes.
So, slow learner. If I'm supposed to, if somebody tells me learn physics,
Yes,
I'll become a slow learner.
Exactly. So that's why. So the NAC criteria of slow learner is just somebody struggling with a subject, whereas the disability definition of intellectual disability is where the IQ of the person is actually below normal IQ, and the person would actually have genuine concerns with grasping and comprehension. So that's a different category altogether, which, earlier used to be called MR, which was mental retardation, which is not a term that one uses anymore. And that's got replaced with intellectual disability. But here the category is also called intellectual disability, and the type is also intellectual disability. And then these other disabilities, which are specific learning and autism, has gotten clubbed, which is what is causing the confusion. Any other questions at this point? Okay. The third group, which is again a concern with the name, but we can't do anything about this right now, which is what the Act calls as mental behavior or mental illness, which is all the psychological health conditions which are chronic in nature, which are causing significant impediment to functioning, get clubbed under mental illness. So episodal mental illnesses are not necessarily covered, but again, this understanding and rules are evolving, and that's not clearly yet defined 100%. The fourth group of conditions, which are a completely new group that was not in the 1995 Act at all, which are the neurological and blood conditions. So these are medical conditions like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, thalassemia, hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, which cause permanent deficit to the body in terms of strength, in terms of other related concerns, in terms of medical concerns that are long lasting and therefore impact day-to-day functioning. So this group of conditions are also recognized as disabilities in the new Act. And the fifth category is multiple disabilities. So when we talk about multiple disabilities, it is when any human being has more than one type of disabilities. It could be two types of physical disabilities. It could be one physical disability and one intellectual disability. It could be one physical disability and one neurological condition. It could be a combination of any of these disability group types, and that person would become a person with multiple disabilities. Yes, Manisha, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, somebody, is obsessive compulsive, suppose
Yes.
washes their hands pretty, so
Yes.
would that be a disability, A? And would that come under mental behavior or intellectual disability?
Yeah.
And if you just, explain that in a
Yes.
nuanced manner, I've not been able to differentiate between these two.
Yes. So anything which is psychological in nature, which is, whether it is OCD, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it is bipolar, whether it is severe depression, whether any of the other which are categorized under the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the psychological manual for diagnosing psychological mental health conditions, they would come under mental illness. However, it is critical to acknowledge that we are not equipped to give labels to mental health conditions. We must really, really be conscious of not labeling people around us as, because only when a qualified psychologist or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist will assess and evaluate a person to have a certain, so there is a difference between just exhibiting mental health concerns or mental health symptoms versus actually having a chronic mental health condition. So I can wake up feeling depressed, but I am not necessarily having depression. I could be feeling, I could be having some traits of showing compulsiveness or obsessiveness, but it may not be a full-blown mental health obsessive compulsive disorder. So between traits of mental health concerns that all of us might exhibit on different days of our lives versus a person who lives with a very accentuated, permanent, day-to-day life impacting condition is what would get categorized as a disability, and not just having some symptoms of some things once in a while, right? The difference between intellectual disability and mental health concerns is, as I said, intellectual disability is a pure IQ function related disability. So when you do an IQ test and if your IQ comes below normal, then you have either moderate or profound intellectual deficit, and that most of the students with severe intellectual disabilities will not make it to higher education. They would have done 10th standard, they would have done NOS, they might have gone ahead to do vocational training, but they may not land up in degree college complex level studying courses because it's something that they don't need to do. Like everybody has diverse talent, and that's just something that they may not be interested in and they may not cope with it also. Specific learning disability and autism are things that I will leave tomorrow's speaker to explain, because it's a long discussion and I don't want to sort of eat up into that, but they come under that category of intellectual disabilities. Yes, Professor Nino.
Taking a cue from what Manisha said just now, she gave the example of physics, and I will give the example of chemistry because I was never very good. I mean, very good. I was very bad at chemistry. I don't know whether I had a bad teacher or I was not interested. So does that, that's the point. That's, that's a takeaway from Manisha. So does that make me a person with an intellectual disability because my IQ level in chemistry is as good as zero?
No, I would like to clarify this. It's not that I'm bad at a subject and therefore I do not have IQ for a subject. Intellectual functioning is not subject specific. Intellectual functioning is assessed in terms of core intellectual functions. So, whether it is reasoning, whether it is logic, whether it is analysis. So the IQ test, which has verbal reasoning, abstract reasoning, it is measuring the core functioning of brain processing. It is not measuring subject expertise. So being bad at a subject or not liking a subject, like say, for example, I hate maths, I don't like maths does not make me to have an intellectual disability with math. It is just that I don't like that subject, and all of us don't like different subjects, and all of us are good at something and bad at something. So being good at or bad at something is not the same as having an intellectual disability. An intellectual disability is when somebody has an IQ challenge, they will find studying anything complex difficult because their ability to reason and process information itself would be impacted. So that's different from just not being good at a subject. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick recap. So as we have said, there are 5 categories under the RPWD Act. 1, which is physical disabilities. 2nd, which is intellectual disabilities. 3rd, which is mental illness. 4th, which is neurological and blood conditions. And 5th, which is multiple disabilities. Any questions with regards to this framework of the types of disabilities? I hope the others are able to follow. Dr. Dharmendra, Mansi, Jagdish, Meera ji, Chetan, कोई भी सवाल? समृद्धि, वंदना, अनिकेत? नहीं? All good? Okay. So then we'll dive into what today's discussion is. Yes, Professor.
When we talk of intellectual disability, as you just mentioned, what are the 4 main brain functions that we are talking about?
So, that's scope of a psychologist. I'm not 100%, I will not be able to give you that 100% accurate information. I can get back to you with that information. But I know it is verbal reasoning, abstract reasoning, mathematical reasoning, and there's one more which I'm forgetting. So I can get back to you with that information. I have that next session with you all. No, that time I'll bring this information. And otherwise, I think tomorrow's speaker will also be able to give you a better idea. Okay. So we'll get into the physical disabilities in terms of what we want to discuss. So under physical, now this is just a list of, on the slide, there are 21 disabilities. So what I shared with you in the earlier slides are the 5 categories. And these 5 categories are enlisted in 21 different types, which, I'm just going to read through once. We will not get into the details of every single type here because that's not the scope. But say, for example, the first one is locomotor disability. Second one is leprosy cured. 3rd is cerebral palsy. 4th is dwarfism. 5th is muscular dystrophy. 6th is acid attack victim. 7th is blindness. 8th is low vision. 9th is deafness. 10th is hard of hearing. 12th is intellectual disability. 13 is specific learning disability. 14 is autism spectrum. 15 is mental illness. 16 is Parkinson's disease. 17 is multiple sclerosis. 18 is thalassemia. 19 hemophilia. 20 sickle cell disease. And 21 multiple disabilities, including deaf blindness. So these are the 21 types which are categorized in the 5 categories that we spoke and discussed just before this. Okay. Today we are going to now go into detail and focus only on the physical disabilities, which are from number 1 to number 11. So the locomotor ones, the ones related to blindness, the ones related to deafness, and the ones related to speech and language disability. So that's the scope of today's discussion, 1 to 11. 12 to 14 is what will get covered tomorrow. Okay. So what are physical disabilities, right? As you can see the term itself, by the term, it is any disability those that affect and deal with the physical aspects of body function. Okay, so just the sheer physical aspects of our day-to-day functioning, anything that's impacting that is categorized under physical disabilities, right? And therefore, there are 4 broad categories of physical disabilities. One which is called locomotor. So anything that's related to our upper limbs, lower limbs, movement, bodily movement, anything that impacts our movement related conditions, those come under the subcategory of locomotor disabilities under the category of physical disabilities, right? The second is visual. So anything that's related to our eyesight and our it affects our experience of vision, those become visual disabilities. Third major physical sense that we discuss is hearing. So anything that's impacting the way we listen, the way we hear sounds, the way we experience sound, that gets categorized as hearing disability. And the fourth is speech and language. So anything that impacts the way we speak, the amount of sound we can produce, the clarity with which we can speak, anything that's related to our spoken language experience becomes speech and language disability. This speech and language does, when it comes under the category of physical disabilities, is not difficulty in comprehension of language. It is not the intellectual aspect of language that we are talking about. We are simply talking about the physicality of speech. So these are the four broad subcategories of physical disabilities. Yes, Manisha. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just wondering that somebody, you remember that Agatha Christie novels, and you have this famous Hercule Poirot. Now, the detective, he suffers from arthritis. So he uses a walking stick. So would that qualify as a locomotor disability then?
So if it leads to severe arthritis where the person needs to always use a wheelchair or something like that, then they would have to go for a disability assessment, and then it could qualify as a disability.
So you would have to get an assessment done, and thereafter.
Yes. Because there is a percentage also here, right? So, when it comes, so just like we spoke about the intellectual disabilities, right? Difference between finding something difficult versus not having the capacity to process information. So like an ache and pain in body function, or say, suppose I have a fracture and my leg is not working, it will not classify as a disability because it's treatable and it's curable. So, when something can be managed, it's not necessarily considered as a disability. A permanent condition which is impacting day-to-day life to a significant extent, and there's a medical assessment process for it, will only get classified as a disability. So everyone with arthritis will not be classified as a person with physical disability.
I get it. So that would mean that, a much more larger percentage of people, because probably people are not getting assessed. There'll be much larger percentage of people who would be having these locomotive disabilities, particularly when they get old.
Yes. Which is why that 1 in 5 has a disability, but they are not being seen, right? So disability is also not like disability also happens to people. It's not something that just you're always born with, or most people tend to acquire disabilities in their lives. In fact, there is also a lot of data that says that a large percentage of population will acquire one or the other form of disability at some stage in their life. It could happen through age, it could happen through accidents, it could happen through multiple reasons. So people born with physical disabilities versus people who acquire are also two different groups, but both are people with disabilities nonetheless. So what you're saying is completely true.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the 4 broad categories of physical disabilities. And these are the subtypes under each of these 4 categories. So when you talk about the group of locomotor disabilities, the first one is just locomotor disability. We'll discuss what these are a little later, but I'm just listing them down here. So under locomotor, there is locomotor, leprosy, cerebral palsy, dwarfism, muscular dystrophy, and acid attack victim. So these 6 types are locomotor disabilities. Blindness and low vision are visual disabilities. Deafness and hard of hearing become hearing disabilities, and speech and language disabilities, just speech and language disability. So these are the different types of physical disabilities. We'll get into the discussion of each type, so don't worry about this. We'll come back to this, yeah. But before we get into the discussion of the different types, I want to play a short game with all of you, okay? I'm going to show some visuals on the screen, and I want you to guess the profession of the person on the screen and the disability you feel this person could have. Okay, just a wild guessing game. No right or wrong answer, just attempt guessing. Okay, so the first image, as you can see, is a lady on a stage playing drums. there is no visual sign of any particular type of disability that you can gauge from the image. So can you just attempt guessing what disability this person could have? And what is this person's profession? Anybody? Okay, Monica Savant is saying hearing. Meera is saying hearing disability musician.
She's a drummer, and she probably, from the shape of her mouth, maybe she has a speech disability.
Okay, so Nina was saying maybe she's a drummer and maybe she has a physical speech disability. Anybody?
Yeah, it's possible she could have a locomotor disability, you know.
Okay, Nisha is saying locomotor disability.
Because I think she's a musician or a symphony, a drummer, or maybe, you know, she's doing a symphony orchestra. She's somebody who's a composer. So
Right.
she has to hear, you know, she can't be hearing impaired.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Right. Okay, sure. So I think everybody is sort of agreeing that as a profession, she's a drummer or a musician. Type of disability, there is a variation, right, from somebody saying she might have hearing to somebody saying speech to somebody saying locomotor. Okay, we'll come back to the answers a little later after I show you all the images. Okay. Okay, Meera is saying hearing impaired people can read music notes. Okay, we'll come back to that discussion. Yes. There is another image now where there is a person on a snow mountain trying to climb that snow mountain using two holding hooks, and they are in a valley-like situation. So what do you think this person's profession is, and what kind of disability could this person have? The person is wearing mountaineering gear, which includes a wind cheater, a cap, and a pair of dark glasses and gloves.
He's a mountaineer, and probably he might not have legs.
Okay, so Nino was saying that okay, everybody's physical trekking, lower limb impaired, profession is mountaineer. Okay, any other, anybody else wants to guess?
Yeah, lower limb impairment and mountaineering.
Okay. Okay, we'll come back to this. So everybody's agreeing again on the profession, which is mountaineering, and actually everybody is saying this could be lower limb disability. Okay. Now we have another image where we have an image of a lady who is also on a mountain holding two ropes as they are coming down a slope, again wearing mountaineering gear, a full red mountaineering suit with a helmet and dark glasses and gloves, and holding the ropes with one hand and showing a thumbs up with another hand. Who do you think could this person be? What is that person's profession? And
once again, a mountaineer, and probably I can't make out the disability. I'm not sure.
okay. Anybody wants to? Okay, Chetan is saying Arunima Sinha, probably hearing and speech disability. Somebody saying autism. Okay. Chetan, you want to guess Arunima Sinha has what disability?
Hi. Yeah, I think she's one of the Indian mountaineers who is an amputee and one of the first woman amputees to scale the Everest.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to test whether that's the right answer or not. But somebody is saying speech and hearing impairment. Somebody else is also saying hearing disability. Okay.
Again, either an amputated limb.
Yes. Okay, and I'm going to show you one last image before we discuss all the responses together, right? This image on the screen is a person trying to paint on a canvas. They are trying to paint a painting on mostly what looks like watercolor painting of a man riding a horse. And next to that is another painting by the same lady, which is of an Indian street with some cattle, a lady carrying regular stuff on her head, and some 2-3 men in the background. So that's one of the paintings that this person has done. And this person is also painting watercolor painting on the left side of the image. What do you think could this person's profession be? And
probably speech and hearing.
Speech and hearing. And what do you think is the profession?
She's a painter.
She's a painter. Okay. Anybody else wants to take a guess? Okay, painter, artist, hearing, speech impaired, hard of hearing, single-limbed. Okay, that's good. Okay, so now let's go over the right answers, right? The lady who's painting, her name is Lisa Fittipaldi. She's a painter by profession, so the profession that is guessed is right. But she's a person with blindness. The person before this, which is Arunima, you all were correct. She's a person with amputation who's the first woman amputee who has climbed the Everest. And she's a mountaineer by profession.
Babu, for injection. You want to go? Get injection, go.
Arunima was thrown out of a train, if I remember, but
Sorry?
correctly.
So
Arunima Sinha, was she thrown out of a running train, if I remember correctly?
Yes. This person, the other person who is a mountaineer also by profession, his name is actually Eric Weinmeier, and he's a person with blindness actually. Okay. And the other person, the first person, she's actually a drummer by profession, she's a musician, and she's hearing impaired. Okay, now these are real people with real disabilities, with real professions. And the reason why we do this exercise is it's very natural for all of us to assume physical disabilities look a certain way. But you can't necessarily always see physical disabilities and have a certain visual of a physical disability, right? So like if Eric is a mountaineer, automatically our mind is going, no, a blind person cannot be a mountaineer. So we are ruling out blindness. Or if somebody is a painter, we are automatically ruling out vision, and then we are not thinking of blindness only as a disability. Or it could happen that when we think of music, we think that no, it can't be, hearing impairment, and therefore we'll remove hearing impairment. Or if it comes to a person with amputation standing up over a mountain, we are not likely to think of physical disabilities. We'll start thinking of autism and things like that, right? So it's very important for us to recognize that physical disabilities don't always look a certain way, and they don't necessarily compel people to. Talent and aptitude is not linked to physical disabilities. Talent and aptitude is linked to personality types. And therefore, when people come to your higher education institutes also, it's important to remember that they can pursue a career and a subject of their interest and choice. And as teachers, if we are surprised, say, for example, if a blind person with blindness comes into an architect college or comes into a college which is teaching fine art, and our immediate question is, but no, how will this person do this? Let's not give them admission. Then we are creating that attitudinal access issue. So it's important to recognize that physical disabilities don't look the same, are not experienced in the same way. People with disabilities are people first, and therefore they have their own interests, aptitudes, and they will do what they want based on what their personalities are, just like anybody else. Yeah. So reiterating this point, people with disabilities do not look a certain way, and that's something that we all must remember, even for things as obvious as physical disabilities. Not every person with blindness will visually look like somebody with an eye deformity. Not every person with hearing impairment will maybe wearing a hearing aid, for example. Not every person with an orthopedic disability may be carrying a crutch or using a wheelchair. So that's a visual representation that we carry in our head. It may or may not be the truth. Yes, Manisha, sorry.
No, I'm just saying that was very insightful. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to say something that again, what you were saying, Neha, that's our interpretation of the disability.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. It's our perceptions that form the barriers.
Yeah. So that's what we are trying to say, that when we want to understand physical disabilities, it's important to acknowledge our perceptions, and therefore then move on to sort of understand physical disabilities for the factual states that they actually are, you know. So it's like saying I wear spectacles is a factual condition. Nobody's making a judgment on me because I'm wearing spectacles. But if I was suppose a person with albinism and wearing spectacles, then maybe there are 3 people making judgments about me. So then people are not necessarily understanding my condition to help me better. They are just operating out of their own perceptions, which is and offering me help, which may not be required also. Okay. So yeah, so that is one very important thing for all of us to keep in mind. So let's just get into understanding the specific types now. So in locomotor disability, the 6 types that we spoke about that the Act has defined are, one is just upper limb or lower limb disabilities, right? Or both. So if you have amputated upper hands, upper limbs, lower limbs, you're not able to move because of upper limb or lower limb challenges, then that's called a locomotor disability. A leprosy cured person who has affected, you know, whose limbs have gotten affected, will also come under the category of locomotor disability. So leprosy as a disease, because, you know, whilst we say we have eradicated leprosy, we do have people who are survivors of cured leprosy for whom it would have the disease did impact their limb parts, and therefore that is considered as a separate category of separate type of locomotor disability. The third is cerebral palsy. Does anybody in this group know what cerebral palsy is? Because it's one of the most misunderstood of physical disabilities. Does anybody have an idea about what is cerebral palsy? Okay, so cerebral palsy is when, yes, sorry, Nino, you want to say something?
I mean, from my very limited understanding of cerebral palsy, probably the brain does not function in a manner where the neurons are able to send electrical impulses to your body parts and you do not have control over them. That's my limited understanding.
हाँ, तो वही मतलब वही है, थोड़ा refined वो है कि basically from the time of birth, the part of the brain that controls muscle movement in our body. So, you know, our hands move because of 2 reasons. One, that we have a hand to move, and 2 कि हमारा brain वो hand को एक signal दे रहा है कि अभी आप move कीजिए. So the part of the brain that controls muscles, all muscles in our body, that part of the brain is impacted from childhood for people with cerebral palsy. So it's a childhood situation. Now, that part of the brain is relatively a complex part of the brain. So a person who's born with cerebral palsy, when they go through a lot of occupational therapy earlier, are all because in childhood, the brain is developing also, are able to sometimes gain decent enough control over regaining that control that is lost. Also important to remember that depending on the severity of cerebral palsy, the signals that part sends to different muscles in the body are different neural connections. So कोई student, कोई लोग जिनको cerebral palsy होता है, जिनको severe form of cerebral palsy होता है, उनका brain muscle control loss is total or large, where they can't control upper limb, they can't control lower limb, they may not be able to control facial muscles. Face is also a muscle, right? Everything in the body is a muscle.
And they are also not able to control their urinary functions, the bladder functions, and all
sometimes
that.
Yeah, in some very severe situations,
yes.
Which is again related because that's also a muscle area, right? You need to hold, in order to hold your urine, your bladder muscle need to work. So depends on the severity. Some people with cerebral palsy maybe कि उनको सिर्फ upper limb का problem है, या उनको सिर्फ right limb में problem है, या फिर उनको सिर्फ left limb में problem है. But basically the condition is कि आपका brain का muscle control function is impacted. Severity varies from person to person. Please remember, हमारे सारे जो physical disabilities हम discuss कर रहे हैं, हर physical disability का वेरिएशन होता है in terms of degree, in terms of severity, in terms of impact. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि आपने बोला किसी के पास cerebral palsy का सर्टिफिकेट है तो मतलब सभी लोग cerebral palsy के हैं तो उनको wheelchair use करना पड़ेगा, ऐसा नहीं होता है. कोई cerebral palsy है वो चल सकते हैं उनको. तो इसके लिए when we discussed earlier, people with disabilities don't all look a certain way, so you can't
Madam,
say. Yes,
Madam, may I be allowed to speak something, Madam?
of course. Who's
Yeah,
this?
I'm Dr. Shivraj Shastri from Gulbarga, Karnataka.
Yes.
You have presented many unique personalities. Some were mountaineers, some were painters, visually having visual impairment and all.
Correct.
This faculty development program named is understanding of disability.
Correct.
Whether we need a new dimension for understanding the disability, or our level is right our level is in the right direction. What should be the level of our understanding about the disability? What should be our perspective, Madam?
Yes. So what we are saying is that right now what we are discussing now is the actual physical understanding of the disability. Ki actually cerebral palsy kya hai, for example. So like that we will discuss what actual blindness is or what actual low vision is. But the earlier section was to help people understand that not all people with blindness will be the same. Not all people with blindness will look a certain way. Not all people with orthopedic disabilities will look a certain way. So that is like the base understanding on which we can build the factual understanding. वरना क्या होता है कि people get into the system कि नहीं अगर blind है तो वो एक ही काम करेगा, या if a person is hearing impairment, that person will do only one thing. So it's important to remember that physical disabilities is a physical condition. People with physical disabilities have varying personalities like anybody else, and therefore they are people and not the condition. So that's the reason why we spoke about the first part, and now we are talking about the actual condition.
And you presented very rare picture, a person having blindness, a painter.
Yes.
It's very rare and very happy to.
Correct. So the reason of also showing these examples, like both in terms of the drummer who was deaf and the painter who was blind, is to show the extremities ki even the most impossible that our mind imagines is possible for somebody who has that interest and aptitude.
No, it is imaginary image or a real image, madam? If we're a real person.
Yes, it is real image. So there is also this person called Ashraf. If you are interested, you should Google up the documentary on Discovery. He's a person who's born blind, who's also a painter by profession. And in fact, there were a lot of neurological studies done at Harvard and other places on Ashraf's brain functioning. And what they found is vision is not just about the visual experience, but also the way people imagine experiences. So for him, when his spatial sense was so good that through tactile, he was actually able to reproduce what others would see through vision. Now, I'm not saying that all people with blindness will have the same level of spatial insight. But of course. But it's to say that some people who are born with that, if they happen to be blind, can also become painters.
Yeah, it differs from person to person, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're all aware, and I would definitely like to give that example of Beethoven, who had a hearing impairment, and he produced the world's best classical music.
Correct. Absolutely. Okay, so we are coming back to the types. I hope that answered your question, sir.
It's all right. Yeah, madam. Yes. Thank you.
So locomotor disabilities, leprosy cured, cerebral palsy. Fourth is dwarfism. So as all of us know, dwarfism is stunted growth, where a person's physical body does not grow beyond a certain limit. So that is what dwarfism is. That impacts people's day-to-day functioning in multiple ways. Fifth is muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is when the body tends to lose muscle mass. So the difference between cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy, both are conditions in which the muscles are impacted. But in cerebral palsy, muscles are impacted in terms of control, whereas in muscular dystrophy, the volume of muscle is lost. So And muscular dystrophy also tends to be a degenerative condition where sometimes that muscle loss tends to happen very speedily, sometimes it happens slowly, and it tends to vary again from person to person. So the physical manifestation of muscular dystrophy might seem similar to cerebral palsy, but the reasons are very different. The person is able to control their muscle, but they just don't have enough muscle to actually enable movement. So there is not a problem with brain control. It's just loss of muscle mass. Yes, Neelu.
It also, I mean, results in death in some cases if it is very severe.
Yes, yes. Because when it leads to severe muscle loss, then all sorts of muscles start degenerating, and then organs are also muscles. So therefore, when life organs don't function, then it could become lethal. So that's muscular dystrophy. And the sixth condition that is recognized as the locomotor disability is acid attack victims. So, you know, if the acid attack has left permanent physical disabilities, then it is also considered as a locomotor disability. The reason why it has been given a separate type is because the impact of that type is quite different compared to the other disabilities, because it could be generalized damage to multiple parts rather than just one limb or the other, but it is affecting the physicality of things. Yes, Neenu.
But it primarily an acid attack from the understanding one has, I mean, from my limited understanding, primarily does it not affect the facial muscles?
Yeah, but it is
the face is targeted primarily.
Yes, yes, yes. So if we see if it has affected vision, then it will also be classified as blindness. But this is when, you know, it is impacting other locomotor aspects, and it has been, for whatever reason, it has been put under locomotor disabilities. Again, like, I'm not questioning this categorization because, you know, yeah.
Understand, but you know, again, from what you are saying, I totally agree. I have a lot of problems with this categorization.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the categorization is being done by the so-called abled people. The so-called normal heteronormative society.
Actually, the issue with categorization in most of these acts is also that it has been primarily looked at from the medical model. So, you know, it's more of the doctors looking at categorizations and looking at them as medical conditions rather than as impacted disability groups, right? So the social model understanding of disability in some of the categorizations is missing. So that's the other issue. Okay, so these are the 6 types of locomotor disabilities: upper limb, lower limb being first, leprosy being second, cerebral palsy, dwarfism, muscular dystrophy, and acid attack. Any questions with regards to these? So I have a question if you all don't have a question. There are 2 images that I'm going to put up on the screen. And I want you to just give me your reactions to both, okay? The first is an image of a person using a wheelchair who is being lifted by 2 people in order to step down a staircase in what looks like a shop or a mall area. So that's image 1. So there's one person being lifted by 2 people on a wheelchair. And the next image is an image of a king being lifted on a palki by 4 people with 2 people walking behind him. Can you all just give me very basic reaction to both the images? Yes.
The first one is a very genuine, need for help, because the person actually does need help. And the second one, of course, is ostentatious. This is branding the money, because you have that, you're wielding your money, and the lesser are the ones who are carrying your palki. So
Okay.
yes.
So second one, you know, completely disgusting. I mean, it's feudal. Absolutely feudal and a mark of privilege. We're treating others like slaves. And the first one
is privileged class, and another one is needy person.
Right. So that's what most of you all are saying. Privilege and power versus need.
Madam,
yes.
actually, here we can see 2 examples. But in the point of view of a person who are affected or person who are pictured, in the case of a wheelchair user, two persons are actually helping, but there's a chance to affect the identity of that person because lack of facility is actually the real problem behind that person.
Correct.
On the other hand, the king
Correct.
is actually he is the part of social privilege.
Correct.
Even though you are presented same issue or same picture,
Correct.
these are actually representing different different approaches or different views on the perception of one's own identity. That is my view, actually.
Correct. Anybody
The
else?
first one is lack of infrastructure. There should have been a ramp there. So nobody would have to, two people helping the person with a wheelchair. If there was a ramp, then this wouldn't have been necessary. So infrastructure support is lacking. And second is obviously privilege and feudal, completely no place for in today's society.
Correct. Daniel is saying both are correct in their own places. Yes, Neenu?
Yeah, the first one is that completely shows our total lack of understanding for people with special needs.
Right. I have another question. How many of you feel when seeing both the images, the person who's sitting on the palki verse and the wheelchair, between the two, if you had to take an emotional response and judge if somebody is in discomfort, who would you judge to be in discomfort?
In the second one, the discomfort is being experienced by the four who are carrying the palki.
Right. And in the first one, do you think anybody is experiencing discomfort?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be a genuine need to help. Yes, there would be physical discomfort for the two who are trying to lift up the wheelchair and helping the person. But I don't think beyond that there would be any other kind of discomfort.
But how would we know whether the person in the wheelchair actually wanted that help?
No, but the fact is he does need that kind of help because he has to go down the stairs and there is no ramp.
Yeah, Chetan wants to say something.
I think the first picture, the person in the wheelchair felt more, uncomfortable. Maybe, maybe he was sort of, I don't know. Maybe that could have been an uncomfortable experience being carried.
Right. Okay.
Madam, emotional, this emotional uncomfortability can also be felt over there because, he might have been feeling, if I had something, I could have been walked and something, these people I'm troubling like that. So I would like to put it as, emotional uncomfortability.
Right. Okay, somebody on the group is saying, on the chat is saying psychological for the first one, even the king will be uncomfortable, or the king could also have disability on second thoughts. That's a great thought. He could have, we don't know. But the question is, the thing that I wanted you all to sort of reflect on, which you all have done quite well. We must help who are in need. That two men would be very happy help in need. Okay. I think important thing is that if you look at it factually, right, both the images, there is one person who's being lifted by another group of people. The purpose for being lifted in image 1 is very different from the purpose of being lifted in image 2. In purpose 1, as somebody rightly said, the lifting needs to happen because there is no access. So if I'm actually running late for a flight, or if I want to shop, and if that institution has not built an ramp for me, then as a person with disability, it's pretty much my right to demand being lifted. So I may either not be in any discomfort, nor might I be feeling bad. I might actually be even feeling angry, saying why on earth there is no ramp. So because it's my right, I should be lifted and taken in, although that's not a very, why should I depend on somebody? But if I have to, then I will. It's the reason why I put this example is actually coming from a lived experience of a person on a wheelchair who once told me that every time I am lifted to go to a certain place because there is no physical accessibility, everybody lands up staring at me. And when I'm being lifted by 4 people, everybody is looking at me as though I'm some, and starts feeling sorry for me. And my response to them is, if I was a Maharani, would you be looking at me like this? So it's again a matter of, where we are coming from. Why do we make these associations? And why do we want to say that are all people on a wheelchair in pain? That's the question. Most of the times we associate people with locomotor disabilities who use wheelchairs as though to be in permanent pain. There could be some physical disabilities who use wheelchair who could be experiencing pain, like say muscular dystrophy, severe forms of muscular dystrophy, some other kinds of physical disabilities where there could be a medical condition associated. But not every person who's using a wheelchair is in permanent state of pain. It's very, very important to remember this and recognize this, and therefore not always look at somebody on a wheelchair as somebody who's permanently under pain, right? Now, if you had to imagine the visual of a person on a wheelchair with no neck control, whose head is tilted and who has saliva drooping, what's the immediate emotional connection we make about this person's disability? And I'm not able to speak.
Cerebral palsy.
Correct. Now, that's a very well-informed decision. It could be cerebral palsy, right? But most of the times when adults see people, especially adults with cerebral palsy, with lack of head control, with drooling saliva, not able to speak, we almost land up judging that this person is, again, I'm saying a politically incorrect statement, but I'm saying it so that we all have it as part of our conscious identity, that ये पागल है, ये बोल भी नहीं सकता है, वो अपना सर भी सीधा नहीं रख सकता है. This is the society's mindset, right? Whereas a person with cerebral palsy in no ways has any intellectual disability.
Or the other thing could be बिचारा देखो,
हाँ, वो इतना भी नहीं कर सकता है, right?
Yeah.
But that person has no intellectual disability. In fact, a lot of memoirs of people with cerebral palsy keep talking about how people talk to them that like they are little children, because our mind automatically says कि अरे बेचारा वो पानी भी नहीं पी सकता तो मेरा बात समझेगा क्या? And then you start talking slowly to them. You sort of, just because that person is having a speech difficulty, you start speaking slowly to them, but they are not having hearing and comprehension problems. So that person is feeling frustrated, saying, get on with life, but you are still going slow. So again, it's our perceptions of what we are seeing the condition to be. But so it's important to recognize cerebral palsy is not intellectual disability. Adults with cerebral palsy need to be treated as adults, even though they may not have control over their body parts, does not mean they are children. That's something very, very crucial to remember. So Jagdish Singh has said, getting lifted is not a right to assert on people who help. Rather, it must be a right which must be demanded from the state, not from the people. That's what is my opinion. Correct. So here the state is in terms of, the facility, infrastructure, etc., etc. Anybody has any questions or thoughts?
Not a question, but just an observation. Like, I just said cerebral palsy just now, but maybe because now we are a little more informed.
Correct.
About these problems and about these people. And so maybe we are able to kind of, relate.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that's the purpose of such sessions, right? So I'm glad that
also we could talk about popular perception, remember how dwarfs are depicted in movies.
Correct.
So in a sense, that kind of trivializes the whole issue or makes a caricature of them. So popular culture and how these disabilities are depicted through cinema and through theater.
That's a whole, Manisha, I've written a lot of papers on that and they've been published as well. And that's a whole lot of different issue, how disability is tackled in Hindi cinema. You either make it very heinous, like the character of Maharani in Sadak. You treat a third gender, transgender also as a disability. You either make it very heinous and you make him, her to be a very scary character, or you make a character like you have what's the name of that movie, Mujhse Shaadi Karogi, Kader Khan, who has a different disability every day, and you make fun of it. You make fun of his memory loss, or you make fun of his visual impairment, or you make fun of his hearing impairment. So, and dwarfism, of course. The dwarfs are either used as caricatures, or they are used as very evil characters who would be there in your life to do some black magic, some kind of an evil deed. And this is a generalization. This is how we portray disability in the movies.
Yeah, so I think you all do have a session on disability in cinema and disability representation in literature. So that, of course, is like another field altogether. But here, even as people, as teachers, when you have students with disabilities in your classes, just this basic level of understanding physical disabilities is important for you to acknowledge that what is the actual nature of that physical condition. So, forget all the or everything else, but just as a physical condition, what exactly is it, and how are we misinterpreting even the physical condition because of our perception? So at least, that needs to be separated and recognize the physical condition to be what it is. I just want to address some of the questions that's come up in the chat window. Students with muscular dystrophy also have challenges with intellect? No. Again, muscular dystrophy is a matter of loss of body muscle. It is not a loss of intellectual functioning. So if the person has intellectual disability and muscular dystrophy, then it would be a multiple disability case. But just a person with only muscular dystrophy do not have, which is why it is a physical disability and not an intellectual disability. Remember the categories we spoke about: physical, intellectual, two separate categories. Okay. Jagdish Singh is saying also cunningness of a character is sometimes portrayed in the form of a disability, Mantra and Ramayana and Bahubali. Yeah, so I think this whole cinema representation I'm not getting into at all because it's very complex and there are lots of things. I just wanted to ask, did Kiran want to say something a little time before or no?
Yeah. Can I, madam? I have a question.
Yeah, Shivaji, just 1 second. I think Kiran wanted to say something.
Right.
I do have a question. When you're looking at cerebral palsy and person is not able to move the muscle, is it like, I mean, it's also, I'm not able, I'm very new to this field. They are not able to move any of the muscle or only some of the muscles.
Yeah, so I'm glad. Please be on, ask as many questions, right? Because the idea is that the space is learning, and that's fine. So it depends on between two different conditions. So like say, for example, your eye power will be different than my eye power, and we both happen to be people who use spectacles. Similarly, for people with cerebral palsy, each person's physical condition will be medically very different. For someone, they may not be able to control their right hand. For somebody, they may not be able to control their left hand. For somebody, it could just be they're not able to control their wrist muscle. For somebody, it could be just the right leg. For somebody, it could be just the left leg. So it really depends that which part of the brain that controls which part of the body muscle is actually impacted. It could be very, very minor. It could be very, very severe. And which is why physically, when you see people with disability, cerebral palsy, physically, they look very, very different. So you could have a completely functioning, walking person who also will have cerebral palsy. And you could also have a person who's using a wheelchair who needs complete physical care for all day-to-day functions, also having cerebral palsy. So it is a complete range. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shivraji.
Madam. I'm a visually impaired person.
Correct.
And I'm a professor in a degree college.
Correct.
Having this much of experience,
right.
I would like to term that there is no disability as such. Lack of facility will lead to disability.
Correct.
The lack of facilities will lead to disabilities. There will be no disability as such. What are your perspectives?
Yes, so that you're talking about the whole social model, right? I don't know whether somebody has already covered it. I think Someshwarji might be covering it tomorrow. But the whole interaction of a physical condition interacting with the environment that either leads to disability or does not lead to a disability, right?
Oh.
So that is, of course, the case. So what we are talking about here as RPWD defined disability types is essentially a group of physical conditions.
Physical.
So for a person with blindness, for example, what is blindness we will discuss now, which is the non-functioning of the eye. That is what the physical condition is. Now, whether that leads to a disabling situation for some versus others depends on the environment and lack of access and all of those things, right?
Oh,
yes.
Very nice. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you, madam.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else? No, okay. So this is where we are sort of pausing on the locomotor disabilities. If anybody has any questions, you all can either ask right now or park later. But please understand that, locomotor disabilities does not always mean people are in pain. Locomotor disabilities does not always mean people will need wheelchairs. It's varied, it's experienced differently, and physical disabilities do not mean intellectual disabilities. So please sort of keep these as 3 key pointers to think of. Yeah. We'll now get into vision related conditions, which are 2 main conditions, which is blindness and low vision. And Shivrajji, please feel free to share any experiences that you might have or you might want the group to know. So in blindness and low vision, we are talking about, again, low vision is a condition where with corrected vision, so with my spectacles, I can still not get my 6x60 vision. So that is when there is low vision, which means that I cannot read normal text even after corrective vision glasses. That is when I would be classified as a person with low vision. Now, in low vision, there is a whole range of experience of vision. So which means somebody might be able to read font size 18. Somebody might be able to read font size 36 only. Somebody might be able to read font size 66 only, for example. How big you need the text to be varies for every person with low vision. The other main factor that experiences reading for people with low vision is color contrast. So if you can see on the screen, I have one word test written where the text is in white against a black background, which we call as a dark background with a light colored text. And the other is where test is written on a white background with the text written in black. So depending on the amount of light that the person, when something is on a light background, that text throws a lot of light. So depending on the level of low vision, some people prefer dark on light, some people prefer light on dark. For people with low vision, experiencing of both reading, writing, and identifying objects would be greatly impacted by the level of lighting in the room, for example. So, darkness will obviously cause greater concerns. Also, the angle at which they read, the distance at which they read is all different, again, depending on the kinds of low vision conditions. Low vision is not we are not discussing color blindness. We are not talking about night blindness. We are simply talking about low vision, which is not being able to see the same level of accuracy with corrected vision. So you require a lot of enlarged objects, enlarged fonts, better light, and different kinds of color contrasts. So that is low vision. With regards to blindness, medically that is defined again in a certain way where the person would have to go get a medical assessment. Please understand that people with total blindness medical certificates could also have what we call as residual vision. When we talk about residual vision, we talk about different kinds of residual vision. So as you can see on the slide, we are talking about 3 types of residual vision. One which is called light perception, second is called color perception, and third is called form perception. Now, when you say light perception, this person with total blindness is able to perceive some degree of light. They mean that accuracy of light may not be very clear. It may not be very acute all the time, but they can perceive light versus dark. May not be able to see any detail, but they have what we call as light perception. The other thing is what is called color perception. So They will not be able to see objects, they may not be able to see visuals, but they might be able to perceive some colors. So that's when we say color perception is present or absent. And the third is what we call as form perception, which is that I don't see detail, but I can see outline and I can see that there is a blob of a person. So I can make out that there is a human being, but I can't see that person. So those are the three different types of residual vision that people with total blindness could have. When we are working with physical disabilities, what we recommend anyone to do is ask that person what is their functional experience of their disability. So you could come with a certificate which says 100% blindness, but you could have light perception, you could have form perception, and as teachers, you could use that residual vision in a way that could aid the student. Say, for example, if you are a student with blindness in a chemistry lab, if that person had light perception, then you could do experiments in a different way compared to if they didn't have light perception. So functional experience of the disability is best understood from the person with disability. So always check, even like say, for example, physical disabilities we spoke about, best check with a person with locomotor disability कि आपको exactly आपका फंक्शनल एक्सपीरियंस या डिसेबिलिटी का क्या है, आपको मेरी मदद किस एरिया में चाहिए. वो स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड क्वेश्चन पूछने से बहुत सारा बैरियर्स और अजम्पशंस हम ओवरकम कर सकते हैं. Any questions on blindness and low vision, or anything that Shivraj ji wants to add?
Yeah, madam, you have rightly pointed out. Some persons with total blindness can identify the objectives, something in front of them. No, sir. Some it may not be entirely true, but somehow he can guess, some objective is there like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing also to note is in terms of people with blindness, people who are born blind versus people who develop blindness later might have a very different experience of the visual world. So people who have had a visual world experience and have lost sight, the visual language that you can engage with in terms of helping them build a color understanding, etc., is different compared to somebody who is with born blindness. So relevance of the visual world, etc., also depends on whether the person is born blind versus late blind. That's true of even other disabilities. Born with disability versus acquired disability, also there is a lot of variation in experience. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So fine. So that's blindness. And anybody else has any questions related to blindness and low vision? No? Okay, I think Krishna also might have answered quite a few questions on that. So I think we shall move on. Then
that session was quite informative. So that's why probably there are.
Yes. The third is deafness and hard of hearing, which is when we talk about our experience of hearing, right? Now it's very, very important to remember that. So, when we talk about, as I've put out on the slide, degrees of hearing, hard of hearing, right? So one is total deafness where you can't hear any sound. The other is the hard of hearing group, just like there is a low vision group in the blindness category. So when you talk about people with hard of hearing, a person with normal level of hearing, quote unquote, although that word normal can
sorry ma'am, मैं एक question रखना चाह रही थी.
हाँ जी, definitely.
Actually क्वेश्चन तो क्या है, टिप्पणी समझ सकती हैं आप इसको.
हाँ जी.
कि स्पेसिफिक क्या है, जैसे शिवराज सर ने जो क्वेश्चन बात रखी है उसी के अकॉर्डिंग मेरी बात है कि जो लो विजन ब्लाइंड वाले होते हैं, जो मतलब 60% जिनको रोशनी होती है या 50% होती है, तो वो लोग तो काफी ज्यादा देख सकते हैं, लेकिन वो लोग हमारी कैटेगरी में पूरी तरह से शामिल होके हमारा वाला रिजर्वेशन भी कहीं ना कहीं गिव अप मतलब ले लेते हैं. तो आप इसके बारे में क्या सोचती हैं? आपको नहीं लगता कि उन लोगों को डिफरेंट कैटेगरी में रखना चाहिए या फिर इस चीज को कहीं ना कहीं खत्म करना चाहिए? क्योंकि टोटली ब्लाइंड जो और स्पेशली बाय बर्थ ब्लाइंड जो हो जाते हैं, जो टोटली ब्लाइंड होते हैं, उसका इनको मतलब प्रॉब्लम होती है इस चीज से, क्योंकि वहां पे वो लोग बेनिफिट हमारा ले जाते हैं.
हाँ जी, नहीं तो ये काफी कॉम्प्लेक्स सिचुएशन है, मैं एग्री करती हूँ। ये सिर्फ ब्लाइंडनेस और लो विजन का कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी नहीं है, ये एक्चुअली अभी जब 21 डिसेबिलिटी टाइप हुई है ना, तो उसमें जो हम रिजर्वेशंस के बारे में बात करते हैं और वो 21 डिसेबिलिटीज टाइप को कैसे रिजर्वेशन प्राप्त होगा, उसमें बहुत सारा कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज है। इट्स स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड तो बिल्कुल नहीं है, और उसमें भी सिर्फ जब हम लोग बोलते हैं कि आई एम श्योर ये आपके अलग सेशंस में भी कवर होगा, बट व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट इंटरसेक्शनैलिटीज, कि हम सिर्फ डिसेबिलिटी के बारे में एक आइसोलेटेड आदमी का बारे में बात नहीं कर रहे, राइट? अ पर्सन विद डिसेबिलिटी फ्रॉम डिफरेंट सोशियो इकोनॉमिक बैकग्राउंड, विथ जेंडर कंसर्न्स और अदर थिंग्स, ये सब मिक्स होके जब आप रिजर्वेशन के बारे करते हैं वर्सेस अ पर्सन विद डिसेबिलिटी, वो मतलब इट्स अ वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स टॉपिक इज ऑल आई वुड लाइक टू से। आई अग्री विथ यू कि वो सिंपल स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड नहीं है, पर it's a difficult problem to solve. Let's
Ma'am, I want to say something.
Yes.
ये इसमें मैं यही कहना चाहूंगा, because I am an expert of special education and rehabilitation sciences. So मैं जानता हूँ कि इसमें क्या है, मेन चीज ये है कि ये it's depend on identified post और it's depend on reservation roster. So इसमें कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, और इसमें कोई भी लो विजन किसी भी ब्लाइंड का नहीं सीट ऑक्यूपाई कर सकता है। अगर उसके पास लो विजन के पास ब्लाइंडनेस का सर्टिफिकेट है और उसके पास लो विजन का बोथ सर्टिफिकेट है, तो वो दोनों में से कोई एक ही इस्तेमाल कर सकता है, दूसरा नहीं इस्तेमाल कर सकता। और अगर कोई लो विजन ब्लाइंडनेस के पोस्ट पर रिजर्वेशन ले रहा है, तो उसके पास ब्लाइंडनेस का ही सर्टिफिकेट होगा। आपको पता नहीं होगा या ये आपके सामने उसने उजागर नहीं किया होगा, लेकिन सर्टिफिकेट इशू बनता है, ना कि आप उसकी डिसेबिलिटी कैटेगरी। दिक्कत ये होती है मैक्सिमम लो विजन भी ब्लाइंडनेस 100% का सर्टिफिकेट लेके घूम रहे हैं, बात उतनी ही है। लेकिन लो विजन को 201 नंबर सीट 101 नंबर सीट मिलती है, 101 200 पॉइंट रोस्टर में 101 नंबर सीट मिलती है, और ब्लाइंड को 1 नंबर सीट मिलती है। तो इसलिए कभी भी ये नहीं होता कि लो विजन को लो विजन ब्लाइंड की सीट ले लेगा या ब्लाइंड लो विजन की सीट ले लेगा। रिजर्वेशन अलग है, रोस्टर सीट्स अलग हैं, इसलिए उसकी कोई दिक्कत नहीं होगी। बस बशर्ते ये दिक्कत हो सकती है कि लो विजन ब्लाइंडनेस का सर्टिफिकेट लेके घूम रहा है, इसलिए वो ब्लाइंडनेस की सीट पर रिक्रूटमेंट पा जाता है।
Madam,
Thank you.
this Dr. Saurabh Roy and other madam have raised a very important issue. This is social understanding is that low vision or blind. एक ही है ऐसा, वो सामाजिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग है, social understanding is this only. When he, of course, sir has very expertise in this field, but reservation policy, even reservation policy also is not understood properly. Disability, the perspective of disability should be understood properly, as well as the policy of reservation also should be understood properly. Because low vision and blind, wherever the question comes, the authority likes to appoint low vision people, so deny the opportunity for blind person, totally blind person. This is the situation. This situation should be understood properly.
I clear again. जब तक whenever a person have a certificate of low vision, then he gets a post of low vision person identified by the government, and a government is not identified that post for low vision, the person cannot get as low vision certificate. But many of the low vision have certificate of blindness, so the reason they get a seat of blind persons.
Correct.
Okay, that's the right thing.
Correct. So that's what. So I think the operational complexities
so just one more point.
Yes.
So how are these persons with low vision getting certificates of blindness?
No,
Then
that is a very complex.
Yeah, he should be mentioned as low vision. No, he will get the certificate of blindness.
If I can just come in, okay. This is a very complex problem. Okay. How certificates are being issued, how they are getting assessed, whether हमारी पूरी system मेडिकली राइट सर्टिफिकेट्स इशू करने में सक्षम है आज की तारीख में, जो डॉक्टर सर्टिफिकेट इश्यूज करते हैं वो भी कौन से, exactly, I completely agree with Salikyu that we are getting off topic right now. This is not the scope of this conversation. I am not a reservation expert.
But
There are lots
off topic, but very interesting topic.
very important topic, very relevant topic also.
You can't say off, because it's linked, but yeah, I guess we are digressing a bit.
No, what I'm, okay, just a second. Ek minute, Neenu ma'am, just 1 second. Yeah, I'll give you chance to speak, but let me 1 minute. In context to education, because that's the focus group that you all have, also it gets played out differently. I think the important things to recognize here is disability certification is a challenge in this country right now. How certificates are issued, किसको कौन सा सर्टिफिकेट मिल रहा है, कैसे मिल रहा है, वो बहुत प्रॉब्लमेटिक है. और वो वाला सिस्टम को स्ट्रीमलाइन करने में इज अ डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ एक्सपर्ट, different kind of process required. दूसरा जो बताया कि disability group itself is not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous. As a person with low vision, आप अगर blindness का certificate ले रहे हैं तो as a person with disability also you must question yourself. तो वो वाला भी issue है, बहुत सारे related issues है. जैसे सर ने बोला कि reservation policy काफी straightforward है कि अगर disability का certificate है तो वही disability category का reservation मिलेगा, but operationally वो वैसे नहीं हो रहा है because of all these other layering factors. So I think let's leave that discussion park that discussion there. I'm sure you will get this opportunity again. Even when we talk about educational reservation, we'll talk about it. जैसे एक दूसरा issue है, at the risk of digressing a little bit, I'm just highlighting it as an issue कि आज की तारीख में higher education में 5% reservation of seats for people with benchmark disabilities, उसको कैसे divide करना, वो कोई भी rule में लिखा नहीं है. So a person with learning disability, physical disability, orthopedic disabilities, everything gets clubbed and one common list gets made. Job और government job में वो rules काफी evolve हो चुके हैं. Government aided institutes में वो rules अभी भी evolve नहीं हुए हैं, for example. So वो वाला issues भी है कि rules of reservation of RPWD are not fully mature on the ground as of today. That is something that we must acknowledge. Yes, Neenu.
It comes under the broader spectrum of PWD.
Yes.
So PWD can include anything and everything.
Anything, exactly.
Yes. So coming back to what I want to say, coming back to what you said, it's a takeoff from what you said. It's not just the disability what matters. The gender also plays a very important role, and considered to be, of course, I don't agree with it, but that's how our texts have been and everything. Initially considered to be a weaker sex, and it's a double jeopardy. Yes. You are a girl or a woman, and you have a disability.
Correct.
And you are, it's a doubly problematic situation for you, where you not only have to tackle your disability and prove your mettle, but you also have to tackle this other obstacle of gender. It's a takeaway from what you said, Neha.
Correct. Yeah, so a lot of those intersectionality issues are there of all sorts of things. And the world is therefore complex and diverse, and we can only identify and become aware of this so that we can impact our immediate environments a little better, right? Because the idea is कि कल अगर आपके क्लास में कोई स्टूडेंट आ पहुंचा तो आप उनके लिए क्या कर सकते हैं वो हमारे कंट्रोल में है, बाकी का सारा चीज तो is well beyond our control. So coming to this point of degrees of hard of hearing as a category of disability, it's important to remember कि हर स्टूडेंट अगर आपको बोलता है कि उनके पास अगर डेफनेस का सर्टिफिकेट है, does not mean they can't hear at all. It could be कि वो या तो deaf culture, वो पूरा जो ग्रुप है where the person can't hear at all, वो हो सकता है, या तो फिर hard of hearing जैसे हमने low vision बोला वो हो सकता है. जैसे हमने low vision में types देखे, वैसे hard of hearing में भी अलग अलग types है, right from mild hearing loss to moderate hearing loss to severe hearing loss to profound hearing loss. कि कौन से distance पे कौन से type का sound कोई आदमी सुन सकता है नहीं सुन सकता है, उसके बेसिस पे कैटेगरीज डिवाइड की गई है. सो whether they can hear distant sound, whether they can hear only close by sound, whether they can hear sound over a phone versus they can only hear sound in person. ये सारी experiences people with hearing impairment के लिए अलग अलग होते हैं. So it could mean कि आपके क्लास में कोई स्टूडेंट है जिसको आपका लेक्चर ठीक से सुनाई देता है अगर वो फर्स्ट बेंच पे बैठेगा, पर आप उनको अगर फोन करोगे तो उनको फोन पे आवाज नहीं सुनाई देगी, बिकॉज हियरिंग इम्पेयरमेंट इज अ मैटर ऑफ फ्रीक्वेंसी ऑफ साउंड एंड व्हाट योर ईयर कैन परसीव. So different kinds of sounds have different pitch and annotation, and depending on type of hard of hearing person that the person is, they could experiencing different sounds differently. Okay. Important question with deafness and hard of hearing is, do all people with hearing loss always have speech loss? What is your thought on this? क्या कोई स्टूडेंट जिसको सुनाई नहीं दे सकता है उनको हमेशा बोलने में तकलीफ होगी या नहीं होगी? जो हमारा पहले एक नॉमेनक्लेचर था, राइट, डेफ एंड डम, अगेन वो टर्म्स हम लोग यूज नहीं करते हैं अभी, बट दैट हमारे जहन में अभी भी वो नॉमेनक्लेचर है. तो हम how often do you assume कि अगर वो सुन नहीं पा रहा है तो बोल नहीं पाएगा, या अगर कोई ठीक से बोल रहा है then we don't assume कि उनको hearing का प्रॉब्लम होगा?
Because I don't know, this is a very generalized statement. I was just thinking, I mean, from Warrior's session to your session, I was just thinking how very difficult it is to be able to understand the kind of problems these people grapple with. Because speech is hearing. So probably, I mean, this is my understanding, and I think I am wrong also, I don't know. So probably if I have hearing loss, I might have speech loss, or the other way around. If I have speech loss, I might have hearing loss. I don't know, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think some people are responding. I don't think so, not at all. Sometimes they are saying more often, yes. Not necessarily, may depend on whether it's congenital or one of them has later acquired. Okay, so important point कि जैसे नीनू मैम ने बोला कि हमारी जो स्पीच है वो साउंड के बेसिस पे डेवलप होती है. So as a child, when a child is born with deafness, they are not hearing sound, which is why the speech doesn't develop. But they don't have speech impairment. Unka vocal cords are fine. Their muscles are fine. So if they go through speech therapy early on in life, which now today most people do have access to, or it's becoming more frequently available, in today's world, there are a lot of people with hearing impairment who do not have speech impairment. तो पहले हमारा जो deaf dumb का nomenclature जो completely politically inappropriate है, पर वो जो nomenclature हुआ करता था उसका basis ये था कि क्योंकि अगर आप बचपन में आपको स्पीच थेरेपी नहीं प्राप्त हुई है तो क्योंकि आपने साउंड सुना नहीं है, आपने बोलना सीखा नहीं है. पर अगर आपको विदाउट साउंड बोलना सिखाया जा सकता है, जैसे थ्रू स्पीच थेरेपी, वेयर द पर्सन थ्रू हेल्पिंग यू फॉर्म योर फेशियल मसल्स teach you how to expel sound, then it is possible that you can completely have normal speech, or you might have slightly slurred speech, but completely functional speech with having profound deafness also, or complete deafness also. So it's very important कि अगर just because if somebody is talking to you normally, don't assume they don't have hearing impairment. Because in fact,
speech also, I mean, since I'm from English and linguistics and literature, speech also means the phonetic sounds and the dip songs and the vowels that you hear and the rolling of your tongue and the movement of your lips, which you might be able to see in a person, but not able to hear. And as you said, with therapy and all that can be.
Correct. Dr. Rupali's comment, I'm going to come back to in 10 minutes, where she's saying people with hearing loss may choose to not speak and communicate with gestures to hint to the other person to respond with gestures. Okay, so we'll come back. I'm holding that thought because I want to discuss that a little later. Okay, so important to remember that not all people with hearing impairment will have speech loss. Okay. Speech and language disabilities is when a person has a speech disability. कि जहां आपको physically आपके vocal cords, voice box, speaking capacity actually problem है, उसको speech disabilities बोला जाएगा. You may not have hearing impairment at all, but you might just have a speech impairment. Okay, so that is that. Now we are going to quickly talk about, before we conclude, are things that you all can keep. So we have looked at locomotor disabilities, we've looked at blindness and low vision, we've looked at deafness and hard of hearing, and we've looked at speech impairment. We are going to now quickly talk about things that you as individuals, आपके immediate environment में when interacting with people with disabilities, what are the things that you can keep in mind? Okay, because ultimately, you know, for me, theory is great, but inclusion happens in practice, right? कि हम लोग ये समझ इसके लिए build up करना चाह रहे हैं कि हम हमारे immediate environment में एक inclusive environment बना सके, right? तो उसके लिए हम जो कल से या आज से शुरू कर सकते हैं वो चीज के बारे में सोचना जरूरी हो जाता है. Okay, so this is going to be a quick question answer rapid fire sort of session, so please respond. Okay, first we'll talk about locomotor and orthopedic disability. When you're talking to somebody who uses a wheelchair, where will you stand around them? अगर आपके क्लास में कोई स्टूडेंट who uses a wheelchair आ रहा है पढ़ने के लिए, तो उनके साथ जब आप उनके साथ बात कर रहे हैं तब आप उनके कहाँ खड़े रहेंगे, कैसे खड़े रहेंगे?
In front of the student.
Okay, in front of the student on the right side. Okay. Okay, quick thing is try and find a chair or sit at their level if possible. Do not stoop down at them, right? Because then that person is to continuously straining to look up at you, right? हम लोग सब जब साथ में रहते हैं तब when we are at the same eye level, it facilitates communication. तो अगर जिस तक don't look down, I mean, don't bend from your back and stoop in front of them in order to have a conversation. If you want to be at the same eye level, the respectful thing to do is try and find a chair or sit at their level in a way that's possible. Otherwise, don't stoop down, continue to remain standing. Okay, because बहुत time हम लोग नीचे bend होके बात करते हैं जो फिर काफी uncomfortable हो जाता है सबके लिए. Okay, if a person is using crutches or any other mobility aid and is trying to open a door, and you can see that person struggling, what would your reaction be if you're in the room? आप suppose room के अंदर है, this person is trying to enter the room and is trying to open the door, and you can see that that person is struggling to open the door because वो एक हाथ से वो crutch use कर रहा है. आपका reaction क्या होगा?
I would understand that the person is having a difficulty in opening the door, so I would get up and help. Okay. Open the door for that person.
Okay, you will open the door.
You know, because here is a marker, and the marker is that the person is not able to open the door. The person might not be asking for help. What is important to understand is the marker that you know, there is difficulty in opening the door. So I mean, before I ask the person if the person needs help, I'd probably end up opening the door. Yeah, I don't know if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah. So Bhavna is saying help opening the door. You're saying open the door before asking. Monica is saying ask if they want help. Very, very important. Please ask before offering help, because if you just go open the door, that person could actually be using their door to stand as a support. So when you suddenly open the door, that person might topple over.
Okay.
So one has to be, please ask before, you know, because what looks, again, taking that discussion, not every person on a wheelchair is in pain. Not every person who's using a crutch looking like they are struggling with a physical space is struggling with a physical space. They could also be using that physical space as support. So I might be actually navigating and therefore I'm holding my hand against the door before I actually move. And if somebody suddenly comes and opens the door, then I've lost my balance. So important to sort of remember that. Yeah. When offering any hot beverage or food to a person with orthopedic disability, how will you offer? If suppose you find somebody using a wheelchair or somebody who has upper limb mobility issues, बुफे में है या कोई लंच में है या कोई सेमिनार में है और सब लोग खाना खा रहे हैं, how would you offer, or if you had to serve tea coffee to this person, how would you offer?
I'd probably end up first asking if the person wants tea or coffee.
Yeah.
And if the person does end up getting the tea or coffee for that person, and also informing that it is hot, so that the lips and the tongue and the palate are not scalded.
Yeah, so one is that depending on the type of locomotor disability, please check with the person whether they are comfortable with what kind of cutlery, what kind of plating, and what kind of before you serve them food. Okay, because every person with a locomotor disability, depending on the type of disability, might prefer to, would be able to eat independently in a certain kind of an environment with certain kind of cutlery available. So if that is not possible in a certain environment, then one will have to either find alternatives or figure that out. So please check what that person's preference as far as plating, cutlery, and seating is before you start serving them. Okay. Sorry, the Diksha Suri is saying I'll go with their instructions, meaning you will ask and you will go with the instructions. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Yes. So just check, because it's very important you check, and especially at buffets, etc. also, because if you just land up with the plate there, then it is like an odd situation and nobody knows what to do with it then. Okay. If you're inviting a wheelchair user to a venue for a meeting or what is it that you need to do? You need to check for the venue accessibility for entry and availability of an accessible washroom. अगर किसी के साथ आप बाहर घूम, and that person is a person with wheelchair, then before और वहाँ accessible washroom है या नहीं, या फिर आपके, you can ask this person whether they have a preferred accessible venue that they regularly visit, and that's where they would like to meet. So checking the accessibility of the venue for a meeting and availability of accessible washroom is very, very critical. Also for an office space, what can you check? Yes, check lift for access. Yes, so it could be anything, right? अगर वो ground floor का जगह है तो ramp का जरूरत है. अगर suppose एक staircase ही है and if the person is comfortable being lifted, that's okay. So again, one needs to check कि वो venue में क्या accessibility available है and whether that person is comfortable with that level of accessibility. Okay. For office space, what can you check? It is check for the height of the desk and the chair preferences that a person with locomotor disability might have, right? So everybody is not using a wheelchair, but people with locomotor disabilities may require a specific type of seating. So before somebody joins your team or something like that, it's important to check for the office furniture and its accessibility. Sorry, Jagdish ji keh rahe hain ki also wheelchair can be mobile inside the venue or not. Yes, so all accessibility checks, right? कि अगर वहां जाके एक ही जगह पे फिक्स हो जाना है या वो मूवमेंट हो सकता है कि नहीं हो सकता है, वो सारा चेक करना जरूरी है. Sorry.
Wonderful, madam. You are giving very useful tips for understanding the disabilities.
Yes.
But sometimes, all times, the situations will be so hard. The persons with disability have to adjust to these situations. Many times this happens.
Correct.
There will not be according to their needs. There will not be some plates according to their needs.
Yes.
The situation, many times the situation will be like this, the persons with disability have to adjust to the situations.
Correct. So everybody has
insights
to
will
always
help us make it more accessible or better place. These insights will help us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, people will definitely adjust, but also people without disabilities should start doing their bit to make sure that things are more accessible, so people don't have to constantly adjust. So it's in that line.
Yes.
Discussing this,
Very
right?
good, right.
So if you're walking with a person using a wheelchair and you are tired carrying your own bags, will you hand them on their wheelchair or will you lean against their wheelchair? a lot of times people tend to do that, but we need to remember that wheelchairs are part of people's personal spaces. So do not use them as furnitures. अगर मैं कहाँ कोई व्हीलचेयर यूजर के साथ लंबे वॉक पे गई हूँ और मैं थक गई और मैंने मेरा हैंडबैग उनके व्हीलचेयर पे हैंग कर दिया, that is not okay. You know, if I'm suddenly tired and I start leaning on the wheelchair to rest, that is not okay, because it's like somebody coming and leaning against my physical body space. So you don't do that. So this is some basic stuff for people with locomotor and orthopedic disabilities. We'll just quickly go over to persons with blindness and low vision. Again, people please feel free to add. एक है कि please identify yourself and others with you. Do not keep asking this, did you guess my name game with people with blindness, okay? हर time मतलब आवाज से पहचानना easy नहीं होता है. हर time आवाज से पहचानना जरूरी भी नहीं होता है. Unless until you are meeting that person every day and therefore that person knows you completely fine, don't expect people with blindness to just know you from your voice. That is, yeah, don't test them. Jagdish Singh is saying correct, very correct. Okay, don't play this.
Yeah, we're not playing 20 questions with them.
Yes,
absolutely not.
Yes.
That's a total no-no. That's
Yes.
a total no-no.
Yes. Okay. So that's one thing. The other is, you know, this I think Krishna might have already covered, but in terms of sighted guide technique for people with blindness, is this already covered? Then I will not go over it. Which is that when you're offering walking assistance to a person with blindness, please do not hold their hand. Please do not put your arm around their shoulder. Don't get them to put their arm around your shoulder. Just offer your upper arm for them to hold, which is one step behind you. Okay, so that is the right way to guide a person with blindness, which is where they will hold your upper arm and they will be just half a step behind you. It is what is called a sighted guide technique. The reason is this is an internationally accepted safety and best practice because it prevents the distance between the person who's leading and the person who's being assisted to be at the minimum, and it allows the person who is being assisted gauge direction without needing it to be verbalized. So up, down, right, left automatically happens when you move your shoulder. So that is very, very important. Provide accessible material if you are a teacher. If you don't have accessible material, if you are reading out things to people with blindness, do not read slowly and loudly. Okay, we all have this natural instinct that when we are talking to people with blindness, we tend to read slowly and we tend to read loudly. They don't have hearing issues, they don't have comprehension issues. They probably are hearing at a much faster pace than you and me, and they are just getting bored saying, please get on with life. Okay. Don't leave without saying you are doing so. So if you're in a conversation with a person with blindness, don't just walk away, because then that person doesn't have a visual cue whether you're present or absent. If you're moving out, please say, I'm now stepping out, or bye, or some verbal cue before you move out. If you are discussing images, then describe them. If you would have noticed, for the visuals that we were using in this presentation, maybe you did not notice, but I was consciously also giving verbal descriptions of those images, so that if there are people in the audience who are visually impaired, they'll be able to access the images the same way. So it's important that if you have visual images in your presentations, if your audience is diverse, then you describe the images that you present. We are not saying don't use images. We are saying just make images accessible. Do not use non-verbal communication only. So don't say, please speak with showing your hand to the other person. Don't say this and that without it having clear verbal markers. So if I want Neenu to speak, I will say, Neenu, please speak. I will not just point my hand and say, please speak, because then the person is not seeing, right? So only non-verbal is not a good idea. Mirroring that you do. So if you're directing somebody with blindness who's standing in front of you, and if you're telling them go right or left, please give them the reference of right and left from which side they are standing and not from your side. We all tend to do this very unconsciously. We tend to remember right and left from our reference point. The person is standing opposite, they might land up going in an opposite direction. So you have to be specific when you give directions to a person with blindness. Okay,
it's the right and left of the person that we are talking to.
Yes. And we just get lost. Sometimes we just all get confused. So that's just something to be mindful of. Okay.
And do not assume that they have sixth sense.
Yes, do not, please. Yes. You know, in regards to you know, media representation, Shirdi Wale Baba gave Amar Akbar Anthony vision, and the whole world changed only when vision was regained. There is no sixth sense. People with disabilities might have enhanced senses because of practice, not because of a God's gift. So please don't expect sixth sense. When you're talking to people who are hard of hearing, you know, this is in light to that question that, sorry, I will just, give me 1 second. Okay, I want to quickly have 2 volunteers. Can I have 2 volunteers? Just quickly. We have 5 moments, right? Nino is 1. Anybody else? 1 more volunteer.
Yes, I will be.
Chetan. Okay, Chetan and Nino are going to be volunteers. Okay. Chetan, for this exercise, you need to have your video on. Okay, great. So what we are going to do is, quickly speaking, we are going to have Chetan be a person who's going to communicate to Nino. Nino is a person who has hearing impairment. So the only instruction is that Chetan has to get Nino to do a task without verbally speaking, because we can't simulate hearing impairment any other way right now. So the only thing that Chetan is not allowed to do is speak to Nino to give her the instruction to do the task. I'm going to send Chetan a private message about the task that he needs to get Nino to do. I want everybody else to observe what is happening. And in order to not disturb the activity, I will provide an audio description of what happened after the activity is over, and then we will have a discussion. Okay, so I'm just sending the task to Chetan. Okay. Okay, I have sent Chetan the task on his private message. Okay, so yes, Chetan can start, and now Nino is the participant.
Are you trying to lift something? Are you trying to lift something? Me. Okay. Me, get up, stand up. Okay. Okay. You are asking me to stand up. Okay. And now you're telling me to take a round and come back to the position where I was sitting earlier. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so can you do that task? Nino has to do that task.
Okay, I have to do the task. Okay, just a second. So I am standing up, whatever little bit my camera can. I'm standing up and I take a round and I come back to the position where I started from.
Yes.
Is that
okay.
what?
Okay, what do you think everybody feels? What was the task? Can anybody try and get? Okay, so before we get into this discussion, basically what Chetan did is Chetan has physically done the task so that Nino could see what he was expecting her to do. And then Nino has replicated what she has seen Chetan do. Okay. So can someone, okay, can the others guess what was the task that Chetan, can you give me feedback whether you think that was the task that Nino was supposed to do? Did she do it correctly?
Yeah, that was the task.
Okay, that was the task. Okay. Anybody in the group, yeah, Manisha has her hand up. Can anybody suggest if there was any other simpler, easier, faster way for Chetan to have communicated to Nino? Manisha, you have your hand up. You want to say something, Manisha? No, okay. Anybody else wants to give any suggestion on how this could have been done faster, easier, better? Yeah, yeah. Priyasha has said the obvious, which we all miss. which is Chetan could have just sent her the message that I sent him. Okay. And yet with almost every person with deafness, we assume they can't read.
No, but then my point is, Neha, of course, I mean, we work under assumptions and perceptions, and we work in our own world of our heteronormativity. But would that not be cheating if Chetan would have sent me the message and
no, if you have a student with hearing impairment in your class, that person can use WhatsApp and you can communicate with that person, right?
Okay. Yeah. So, but then I totally agree कि ये जो misconception है कि because I have hearing impairment and I cannot read.
Yeah. So basically the point is, when we talk about mindful with people with deafness and hard of hearing, you don't always have to depend on sign language and miming as the only means of communication. If you know sign language and can, it's like saying if I don't know Hindi, agar mujhe Hindi pata nahi hai, then I will use Google Translate and convert and show you message in text. If I am in Japan and I don't know Japanese, I will use a translator and allow you to read. So वैसे ही अगर मुझे आज की तारीख में sign language पता नहीं है, तो I don't have to go into a brain freeze feeling कि मैं communicate कैसे करूंगी, or I don't have to make communication complex. The person can read and therefore you can communicate in writing. Okay. When you're talking to people with hard of hearing, don't turn your back while talking to them because they could be using lip reading. Okay. So agar lip read, har aadmi, again, please, not every person with hard of hearing uses lip reading. So if you don't turn your back, it will be easier if they are using lip reading. Okay. Speak in an area that has good lighting near your mouth and face to enable lip reading again. So ideally, agar well lit area hai, agar aap koi speaker ho koi session mein, so make sure that your face is well lit if there are audience that are lip reading. Okay. Do not eat whilst talking to people who are hard of hearing because that muffles your sound. It also impacts the way people lip read. Already जो hard of hearing है, जिनको sound में problem है, उनको खाते खाते अगर आप उनसे बात करेंगे तो हमको भी अच्छा नहीं लगता है, right? It is not clear.
Also, there is a very big problem because we are not aware what is the level of the hearing.
Exactly. So again, functional. Always ask the question of functional disability. You know, what is the level you are comfortable with? You know. Also, don't shout and exaggerate mouthing while talking to a person with hard of hearing. आप चिल्लाएंगे तो उनका level of hearing बढ़ नहीं जाने वाला. It is not an issue of volume. It is an issue of frequency. And अगर आप exaggerated mouthing करेंगे तो उनसे उनका lip reading better नहीं हो रहा है. तो आपको एकदम animated तरीके से उनके साथ बात करने का जरूरत नहीं है. Okay. Also, if you are using a sign language interpreter, please do not talk to the sign language interpreter. Talk to the person. The sign language interpreter will do the interpretation on the side. So your visual direction should be towards the person who you are talking to and not to the interpreter. When meeting people or inviting people for dinner, check for noise levels in their environment. जब अगर कोई hard of hearing आदमी है, उनको an environment with a lot of background noise causes difficulty in hearing compared to inviting them on a more quieter place. So जैसे हमने locomotor disability के लिए accessibility बताया, वैसे ही hard of hearing के लिए noise levels are important. Okay. And we've done this. Don't expect persons with hearing impairment to not be able to speak. They are not always connected. Okay. And just last 2 minutes, sorry, I'm 5 minutes over time. People with
please have the last slide one just for that 1 minute.
Yes. And for people with people with speech impairment, be patient to decipher what is being spoken, right? So again, don't jump to using communication, chat, visual cues, sign language. मतलब immediately आप jump मत कीजिए. It's like understanding ourselves and tuning ourselves to a different accent, right? अगर आप कोई बाहर गांव के देश में जाएंगे और आपको उधर का accent नहीं समझ आ रहा है, तो आप अपने आप को आपके ear को tune करने के लिए थोड़ा समय देंगे, correct? वैसे ही अगर if there is a person with speech impairment with either slurred speech or slightly different accent, give it some time and allow your ear to get used to that sound rather than just jump and say, I can't understand what you're speaking and start getting all impatient around such a person, right?
You've just come to my point that we have to be patient with people who stutter or stammer.
Yes. So we don't have to be in this excessive rush to just communicate all the time, right? Communication also happens in silence. So allow that space to exist, correct? Use communication boards or apps if that is the person's preference. So again, check with what the person would want. And you do not need to speak slowly to a person with speech impairment. Just because they are speaking slowly to you, they are not expecting you to speak slowly in reverse. ऐसा कोई जरूरी नहीं है क्योंकि उनको listening challenges नहीं है. Yeah. Starting with that, I am going to hold.
The last slide, please. The last slide.
Yes. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to stay back and answer them. If others are in a rush, they can check out. I have put my
last slide. It's gone.
Sorry. I'm going to put my email ID and in the chat. If anybody wants to reach out, you all are feel free to. We will also obviously be meeting on the 6th, where we'll be discussing specifics around inclusive education, which is personally my interest area. And we'll be talking about how to build inclusion in colleges, etc. But in the meantime, if anybody has any burning questions, then you can reach out to me on.
Very informative.
Yes.
And one ends up learning things. You kind of take things for granted that, this is how things are going to be, or this is how life is going to be for the disabled. But it is not that. It's a different ball game altogether, and we have to understand that.
Yes, thank you.
So Neha, do you have a feedback form that we need to fill in?
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening,
ma'am. From the very beginning, I could not communicate because I don't know much about this. And as it happens, when I see people with a little disability, we tend to sort of freeze a bit. We don't want to do the right thing, the wrong thing. So because you don't want to do the wrong thing, you sort of keep sitting and don't offer any help. So, I mean, partly, of course, your session has been so helpful in giving us clues as to what we can do. But I think we need a lot of awareness and practice.
Yeah. So we'll address this a little bit in that second session that I'm going to conduct as to what is the basis of this fear, right? And why do we feel so much fear? And what is the solution to that, getting out of that fear? So we'll address that a little bit in that other session.
Thank you so much.
Madam, 1 second. Hello.
Sorry. Yeah, regarding that question about feedback form, Shivaji ji. Manisha's question regarding feedback form, I think Dr. Rupali, you all might have a feedback form for the program, right? So you can share that itself.
Yeah,
Hello.
We'll send it in the WhatsApp group. It will be a Google form, and we'll send the link on the WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, Shivaji.
Yeah, madam. Not a question, but you have given very unique and useful tips to understand the disability. You are a very, very resourceful personality, and one should be very thankful for you, and gratitude from my side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Can I leave, please?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yes, Arpit.
Yeah. So what you have told us, we didn't know that. So do you have any kind of material or some manuals?
I can share this presentation if you want. I'm happy to do that.
Neha, we'd like that.
Yes.
If you could share it, and it could be shared in the WhatsApp group, it will be helpful to everybody.
Yes. I will send it across to Someshwar ji or Ritvik ji.
Yeah, send it to Ritvik, please, and he'll share it with all the participants. In any case, both the sessions were recorded, and the recordings will also be available with the participants.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Neha. I don't think I have the right words to describe how much I've loved both the sessions today. And as I'm just echoing what Professor Ninu and Dr. Nina Vidh said, that, we want to be helpful. We don't want to be disrespectful or hurt persons with disability in any manner. But in doing that, we don't realize how we could be excluding them from, tasks that they can easily do, and, offending them. And these little things, I think everyone should be, keeping in mind when dealing with persons with disability. And it really has been an eye-opener.
Thank you. I think thank you for participating. I was really, I was like 5:30 to 7:30. I hope everybody is not in the evening unwinding mood, but I think it was a great group, and I love to engage with all of you all. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye, Neha. Thanks.
Yes. See you all on the 6th. Yes. Yeah. Bye-bye.
And all the participants, we'll see you tomorrow. Please, even if you are have joined the flexible mode, it's where we request that please attend the sessions, because you can see that how experiencing these little things and interaction really helps in absorbing what is being talked about, rather than just viewing it later. So I really request and recommend that all participants, whether they're on the flexible mode or not, should attend this sessions as much as possible.
Hello, madam. Hello, madam. Hello.
Yes.
One doubt, madam. I'm actually joined this group as in second mode. That is, I'm not attending in all sessions. But what will be the conditions, or when I will get the all lectures, and how can I respond to the other session which I can't attend it?
There on the WhatsApp group, there will be a link for the Google Classroom. I'll ask the admins to send it again.
I done that. Then questions or quiz or anything will be available.
Yeah, all information and links to the recordings will be shared there. Does that answer your question, Srijitji?
Then my doubt is how can I actually can I complete this course on time or on 10th July?
Yeah, definitely. You can complete it on the 10th. Yes.
I'm sorry, मैम, मुझे भी एक बात कहनी है.
हाँ जी.
कि मैम फ्लेक्सिबल मोड में मैं भी हूँ, लेकिन मैं सीरियसली ज्वाइन कर रही हूँ और मैंने पूरा सेक्शन आज का भी अटेंड किया, और मैं रेगुलर जितने भी दिन ये कोर्स चलेगा मैं रेगुलर अटेंड करूंगी इसको.
हाँ, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर दैट. मैं बाकी सबको भी ये रिकमेंड करूंगी कि अटेंड करें.
Madam, one doubt also. Madam, if I need 1 or 2 days leave, is there any possibility to avail that for attending this course?
Which option have you applied for?
Second option, that is not a flexible mode. But,
yeah, so in flexible mode, you will not be.
I would like to attend 2 or maximum days. But is there a chance to get the duty certificate for that specific day?
No, for a flexible mode, you will not. We will not be issuing any letters for duty leave. So you have time. Extra time to be able to finish all the assignments, and enough time to look at the recordings. So you don't require duty leave for that.
Okay.
At your convenience, you can see all the recordings. Any other question?
No, madam, no.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock.